Hi everyone, my name is Crystal Hartstaff from the Gentle Counselor. Today we're going to be talking about attachment styles and parenting and how this affects us when we're talking about generational trauma. This conversation is really important and something that comes up a lot with the clients that I work with because often we have experienced something in our childhood that was traumatic, whether it was a single event or multiple events that kind of build up into this overall feeling of how it's affected and impacted us. And then we find ourselves as parents either struggling with how to parent our child because perhaps that's not how we were raised and we want to do something differently. Or we can also get triggered by our child because they are exhibiting some of the similar behaviors that we were, or they're at the age that we were when something traumatic or upsetting happened. And that feels like we're sort of reliving it. So let's start with a very quick overview about the attachment styles and what they are and what it is. So basically, your attachment style is your blueprint for relationships. It's formed from our early experiences with our primary caregivers. So these could have been your parents or whoever was your primary caregiver in your upbringing. We have different family dynamics, so that could be foster parent, step parent, grandparents, single parent households, whatever it was for your dynamic growing up. And so, what we're looking at is in those early experiences with them, what were they giving us with meeting our needs? How were they making us feel safe, seen, soothed, and supported? And you're either going to feel like they were consistently meeting your needs as best they can. So we're not talking about perfect parenting because that doesn't exist, but were they meeting your needs most of the time in a good enough way? And if so, then it's likely that you develop a secure attachment. On the other hand, if you feel like they weren't consistent in meeting your needs, maybe they were too inconsistent, or you feel like that wasn't available to you at all, then it is more likely that you kind of adapted to survive, basically, growing up. And this is where the insecure attachment style begins. So there are three insecure attachment styles. There's the anxious preoccupied, where someone craves closeness. They fear rejection or abandonment. They may feel like they're being too needy, like their needs are too much for someone, or perhaps they've been told this. As a parent, you may find yourself feeling anxious and worrying constantly if you're doing enough for your child, or you may be feeling overwhelmed by your child's needs. Sometimes it can just feel a bit too much. Then we have the avoidant or the dismissive, where someone may feel like they have to avoid that emotional closeness, and that is because they didn't receive that. They were not allowed to go to someone to have that emotional closeness. So that feels uncomfortable. And also, it feels unsafe, like they can't trust to find that in others because that's not what they experienced. So this may look like you valuing your independence, and it can also be really hard to be vulnerable with others and open up, or even be able to identify and put words into what you're feeling because that kind of feels foreign to you. As a parent, you may find it hard to comfort your child, or you could even feel numb or shut down during those emotional moments. Then we have the disorganized, which is kind of a mixture of the anxious and avoidant, like the fearful avoidant, which is someone who is longing for connection, but also afraid of it. So it's sort of that push and pull, like, go away, no, come here, I need you. You're experiencing both of those at the same time. Often this is shaped by trauma, and very inconsistent or neglectful or abusive caregiving. As a parent, this could show up by having unpredictable reactions. For example, like you're over involved one moment, but then withdrawn the next. And I just want to put in here that this is very oversimplified, but it's a good starting base for understanding what are the attachment styles, which one do I feel like resonates with me the most. And when we're talking about our attachment styles and attachment wounds, we want to recognize that there are attachment patterns, and these get passed down. This is where the whole intergenerational trauma comes into play, where we can see the effects that we are having on our children. We can also reflect on the effect that our upbringing and our parents had on us. And continuing to go back, we can see how their parents, so our grandparents, were raising them, and so on and so on. So when we're thinking about attachment as parents right now in this moment, we're also looking towards the future of trying to have that positive impact, that positive ripple effect on our children, not only to grow into more healthier or emotionally in tuned adults, but also keeping in mind if they choose to have children one day, how could that positively impact them and the kind of parents they're going to become and the impact on our then grandchildren, right? And so on and so on. So we can look both past and present when we're talking about this. Ultimately, these are unconscious patterns where it's being repeated in those early experiences. So we're not necessarily fully aware of what is happening. And that's the tricky bit. And that's why the cycle keeps continuing, which is also why you, as the cycle breaker, it feels really hard and really challenging, like uncharted territory. And sometimes it can also feel hard knowing where to go to or who to talk to because that's kind of what's been happening is, things are either swept under the rug in the family or we're told that's just the way it is, or people put that toxic positive spin on, well, those are your parents, you have to love them, right? These things kind of put a brick wall up in front of those of us who are trying to self-reflect and understand things not necessarily to place blame on others or ourselves, but to recognize errors or mistakes and then make a choice to, okay, what am I going to do with that now? How do I repair the rupture that's happened? How do I learn from my mistakes and move forward in a way that feels good to me and who I am and the person I am still becoming and the parent I want to be? And as I mentioned before, our children can also activate these sort of unresolved wounds that we have in us. And this happens in many ways for many reasons. We feel emotions physically in our body, which also means what we have experienced in the past is living in us physically now. And I like to talk a lot about inner child and the parts that still live within us even now. So, say, for example, you had a traumatic experience at 6 years old. When your child becomes 6 years old, you might find that you are getting more triggered and you're noticing things like, why am I feeling more agitated? Why do I feel like I'm losing patience? Or you may actually be consciously, like cognitively aware of it, remembering, like, oh, this is the age that I went through that. And you may look at your child and think, oh my goodness, how could someone do that? Like, I'm looking at my child and I'm wondering, and I can't understand it, and I'm also standing here promising that I would never do that to my child because I can't even fathom how that was done to me, right? So these kind of things can come up, and that is activating that wound in us. So we have that 6-year-old little inner child that is still very present and wounded and existing as if it is still happening right now. So, without getting too into it or too in depth for what is very much a personal experience, say that was someone coming to me as a client with counseling, we would talk to that part and try to understand what role is it trying to play, who's it protecting, what is it scared of, and what does it need. And often, what those young parts of us need is to have us now as an adult update them on what is the current situation and the current story. And that is where things like EMDR therapy, for example, or somatic therapy can be really helpful in feeling into those parts. When when people talk about feel your feelings, that's kind of what we're talking about. That part wants to be heard, it wants to be seen, and we can definitely do that with them. So in that, we also need to remember the importance of how trauma shows up in our body, how our triggers come out of our body, how our nervous system comes into play when we're talking about fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses of the nervous system. And somatic is bringing in that connection of mind and body. So sometimes when something upsetting is happening, you may get like a trembling legs, sort of like adrenaline coursing through you. You may feel like a tightness in your tummy or a heaviness in your chest, or your breathing starts up, or clenching your jaw. All of these are your body's cues to you that something is going on, and we need to pay attention to that. This can be particularly challenging in the middle of parenting moments when we have our child who's upset, or a toddler having a tantrum, or we're driving in the car and we can't immediately tend to the baby crying in the car seat. Whatever the challenge may be, can be really difficult to be aware of what is going on for us when we are trying to be present for our child and what is happening with them. And often we have this what can feel like a disconnection between these two separate things, but they are coming together and happening at the same time. And this is why I will always say it so many times that the goal is not to be a perfect parent. In fact, it's a myth. It does not exist. There is no perfect parent because there is no perfect human. We're human, we're going to make mistakes. What matters is what we do from that mistake. What do we do when we recognize, and what kind of a choice are we making after that point? What our children actually need is us to be a good enough parent. And we can look at the figure of being a good enough parent 30% of the time, which means that we are doing our best to be attuned with our child. We're doing our best to repair when we make mistakes. And we are doing our best in being predictable and consistent with providing that emotional safety to our child. Attunement is that feeling of being in harmony or in sync with someone else's feelings. It's kind of that instinct or that deep knowing of this is what that person's needing right now, or I can recognize that my child is experiencing this right now. It's that deep knowing. We feel good as parents to be attuned with our child, and we also understand what it feels like when we have someone being attuned with us, how good that feels. When someone notices something in us, when they recognize that we have a need, when it's sort of met without us having to ask or make demands of that. It's that sense of belonging and connection and safety that is really important for us to feel. When we talk about repair, we talk about rupture and repair. So a rupture may happen when we've made a mistake as a parent and we've misunderstood a need, or we haven't met a need for a variety of reasons. So it could be either that we misunderstood what was happening for our child, and there's that misattunement that can sometimes happen where we didn't quite get it right, again, because we can't be perfect. Or it could be because we've had our own things happening, whether we had our own stressful day, or we're tired and we're kind of fed up, and maybe we have undesirable responses like being impatient or yelling, or being dismissive of our child's needs. Again, because we're not perfect, right? However, when we have ruptures, when we make mistakes that are kind of repeated and that's consistently happening, that's where we're going to see the issues. What matters is when we repair. So we can apologize to our children, we can reconnect as well, and we can give them that emotional safety, and sort of teach them about their emotions and their needs and their inner world and what is happening. Because as our parents, we can guide them through that. And even if we're trying to figure it out ourselves, we can still be there and support our child and be like, hey, I'm here. We're going to figure this out together. Most of the time, what our child needs, and really what anyone needs, is just someone to be there with them whilst they're having that feeling. We don't necessarily need people to jump in and have it all figured out, or to problem solve, or to fix it. A lot of the times, what we want is for someone to just be with us and listen. And it feels good to know that someone's there and we're being listened to without judgment, without being rushed, or without feeling like we have to get out of feeling sad into feeling happy, right? That we can just be in that moment and ride that wave of the emotion as we have, the big wave come up, and then it eventually goes down and things settle. And even as I'm talking about that, I'm noticing how that is feeling in my body, kind of this tension of rising, and then it's like a deep sigh of relief after. So that's what we're trying to do, and we can model that with our children. We can role model in the moment, and we can sort of like actively coach them through that too. Sometimes, if you can't do it in the moment, that's when we use our resources and build our toolkit later, such as getting a children's book about emotions, and we read that at story time later. And we can go, hey, that's like how when you were feeling a bit upset today, and look, here are some ideas of what are some of the things you can do, right? Trying to have those teaching moments, or maybe when you're playing with the dolls or the babies together, you can kind of role play those things that are happening, or if your child's watching TV and an episode is talking about these things, you can use those opportunities to engage in that conversation with your child as well, especially if it's an interest of theirs. You can build upon that and find connection in that way too. There's so many ways. So for some of us who have been learning about attachment styles, you may feel like a higher pressure to feel like you're making sure that your child is going to have a secure attachment. And I just want to say that if you're already feeling that, it's you're probably doing that 30% good enough parenting. You're probably doing more than that, to be honest. Um, because again, there is no perfect parent, but what we can do is our best. We can meet our child's needs, and we know that it doesn't have to be 100% perfect 24/7 because that's an impossible demand to put on anyone. And as an adult, we can also have what we call earned secure attachment. So even if we're realizing that we had an insecure attachment growing up, we can make active choices in our life now to work towards having an earned secure attachment. And a lot of this comes not just by the work we do individually, but the relationships we have with others, which is why it's so important to not get caught up in the idea that healing is individual and that you're only supposed to rely on yourself, or that you only have control over what you say or do or think, because the reality is that we're much more complicated than that. And we want to have that sense of belonging and safety and community with others. So, a wonderful side of having healthier or healthy relationships, whether friendship, co-worker, therapeutic, romantic relationships as you grow up and into adulthood, is that these can be golden opportunities for earned secure attachment, where you have these relationships where you feel that attunement, where someone is there for you emotionally when you need them, and you are also doing that back. So we need to have that back and forth with someone where it's reciprocal, right? It's always a give and take in relationships, and learning how to do that and navigating that can have a nice sense of achievement and feeling good and growing in ourselves as a person too. And this doesn't have to be really big overnight changes. We can have lots of small changes that eventually have a really big impact. So if you feel like you're parenting securely without even having that sort of template or that blueprint of what is a secure attachment, it's normal to feel grief and upset and confusion and overwhelm about that, because often when I talk about that 30% good enough parenting figure, there are either two reactions really, which is the, oh, that makes me feel good because I'm pretty sure I'm doing more than 30% good enough parenting for my child. Also, on the hard days where we're struggling and we're tired or we have our own life stress, we can go, okay, all I need to do is be a good enough parent 30% of the time. And then the other side of that, when we are reflecting on our own upbringing, we might have that really upsetting or depressing realization of, wow, I couldn't even get 30% good enough parenting. Like that feels like a pretty low or achievable bar. So it's normal to have grief and sadness around what little you didn't get. And we can sort of, in our mind, imagine him or her in our body and sort of give them a cuddle, give them some reassurance that they deserved better than that, that they didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't their fault. There's nothing wrong with them, and they deserved to be treated better than that. So we can have sadness for what was, and we can have grief over what could have been, especially if you're watching your child now sort of flourish into their own person, and the things that they're interested in, and the excitement that they have, and the amazement of watching them grow into this amazing human being that your child is. And especially if you see similarities in how you were as a child, we can also have some grief in what feels like watching a different version of us grow up, if that makes sense. Especially, yeah, if you feel that sense of like, oh, my child is very like me, that can kind of come up as well. So, just a gentle reminder that there is enough space to hold these things as true. Can recognize the things that happened to us, and we can recognize that we are the adult now, and we have our own control and power now, which we can use. And sometimes it can just feel really overwhelming to have access to all this information. Um, and feel like, oh, there's so much to do, or I have to do everything all at once, or there's so many things to change, right? And we can feel overwhelmed with that. So sometimes it's about taking a breath and just realizing that this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. Healing takes time. It's okay to have patience. And it's not linear. It's not like a straight line of like start point, end point. Often it's like a circular spiral where as we unlock things or memories or experiences and we kind of process them and we look at them with curiosity and compassion, then suddenly another layer of something else comes up. And then you kind of feel like you're starting again, but really we're just going deeper and deeper and understanding ourselves and our experiences. Um, and that's a really important part of self-growth is that we're kind of always going to be doing that in particular ways. It might feel like a lot at once, but as time goes on, you'll kind of get that muscle memory of, oh, this feeling's coming up for me, and I know how to sit with it and be there for myself and how to process this feelings and talk to those parts of myself that are feeling this way or that way. Um, and this is where we talk about the importance of reparenting. So we now, as the adult, can sort of reparent those younger parts of ourselves where we may have lacked or not received that attunement or safety or connection. We can now give that to ourselves as an adult and reparent those parts of ourselves. So, like before, when I was kind of demonstrating how you can talk to that younger part, of validating and acknowledging their feelings and providing safety, we can do that for ourselves. And that's where boundaries come in. Boundaries are for you to help you feel safe, and to stand strong in your power, right? Um, because we can't control other people. We can't control or change other people. However, we have agency over who we are in our life right now. So, with a mixture of the inner child work and having that support, you can work towards having that own secure attachment. And if you feel like you're ready to reach out and you need someone to talk to, I do have availability coming up in my counseling calendar. So you can head to my website, thegentlecounselor.com, and check out my offerings. I do online sessions for individuals and couples. I hope that this podcast episode was interesting and some parts resonated with you. If you are interested in learning more about the attachment styles, I do have a course as well on my website, Understanding the Attachment Styles, which goes a little bit more in depth and gives you some practical strategies for you to explore and work through things as well, which you may like to check out. If you are looking for something else to do, like reading, for example, if that's something you like to do, like reading and journaling, I do have a link on my website as well of books I recommend, and you can check that out for some helpful ones too on this topic. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.